Sweet. And we're live. Welcome everyone to our second policy roundtable with FutureWise's Growing Together campaign. I'm Marcella. I'm the state organizer. My job is to bring these campaigns to all of you to build support that we need to pass some awesome legislation. Last week, we kicked this off with our first roundtable, had FutureWise experts discussing our top priority to remove barriers to emergency and supportive housing types. And I'm excited to be back this week. We are going to talk about our second priority, which is encouraging middle housing. And today joining us is a new team member and consultant with us, Marcus Johnson. Marcus, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Marcella. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcus Johnson. I am coming and working on this topic from Makers Architecture Urban Design, which is the planning firm that I work for as a consultant, and working with FutureWise here on just housing policy, middle housing in particular, and kind of an expertise on building codes. And so I think that's going to be something we dive into today, and how building codes might be impacting middle housing development overall. And so just happy to be here.
Sweet. Happy to have you, Marcus. I feel like you are like such an expert on so many things that this is going to be a great roundtable. We're going to dive into a lot of really exciting stuff. But for those of you that are either new to FutureWise or the Growing Together campaign, just a little bit of context. FutureWise, we're a statewide land use organization. We work to build healthy, affordable, environmentally friendly communities across the state. We act as steward to the Growth Management Act, or the GMA, which just helps cities and counties plan for growth. Part of the work that we do is our statewide campaign, which we call Growing Together, where we work to pass bills and policies that help Washington grow in a way that does work for everyone. So again, today we're going to be talking about encouraging middle housing. But before we get into the specifics of that, I'd love to just make sure that we are all clear about some of the wonky terms that we're going to be talking about, especially when it relates to housing and building code policy. So Marcus, if you could just walk us through some of the key definitions that folks need to know.
Yeah, so I think we'll start with just middle housing. And I think overall, in the Washington context, I think is kind of the context that we want to frame this in terms of. Middle housing is essentially small multifamily buildings or housing, and it could also be townhomes as well, underneath Washington's kind of definition. But these are smaller multifamily buildings that have the scale and kind of feel and of like a single family home, and so they can be, fit right next door to a house, and not look that much different, not feel that much different, but have more homes contained in them. And so, from Washington State's perspective, this is a range of units from like 2 to 6 units, and these include housing types from townhomes to duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, all the plexes up to sixplex, and some other terms, courtyard housing, and housing types like that. I think the other term, we also stack flats as a kind of a definition term as well. And that's also highlighted within HB 1110 and kind of the state's bill towards that. And I have a great graphic here to kind of just visualize what the stack flat is. I think, ideally what these are buildings where units are stacked on top of one another. They can be separated in kind of a sixplex formation like this, where you have a central stair and you have 2 units off of the side, and those 2 units kind of go up on the 3 stories. Or, they can be maybe a simpler version or a smaller version where you have a triplex. And if anybody's familiar or has ever been into like kind of the Boston area or Chicago is another area where these are kind of popular, the kind of the triple decker type of setup, if you've ever heard that term before. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we say stack flats, is just units small middle housing where units are stacked on top of one another. And yeah, building code council is another term that we want to make sure that we have highlighted. This is a state agency that is, responsible for establishing minimum building regulations. So, regulations such as mechanical, fire, plumbing, and energy code requirements. And they are an agency that actually just essentially adopts the state building code version. And so the state rules for building in the state of Washington are adopted by the state building code council at a high level across the state. And then jurisdictions within that. So your individual city that you may live in has some flexibility to adopt their kind of local version of that and make some changes from the state, but they all kind of hail from or start at the state level and then make adjustments from there. Other terms I want to make sure we get over is let's see. I think it's just the IRC and the IBC, and so sorry to use the shorthand real quickly. That's International Residential Code is what stands for the IRC, and the International Building Code is the IBC. These are kind of shorthand terms to just talk about what is a separation between what is considered the residential code, and the residential code regulates single family houses, townhomes, and duplexes. So basically 1 to 2 unit buildings are all regulated by the residential code. Washington has its own iteration of the International Residential Code called the Washington State Residential Code. And then every other building, so 3 units or more when we're talking about multifamily, and any other commercial building, office building, et cetera, is regulated by the International Building Code or the Washington State Building Code. And one moniker I'll just say on this, the international part of this thing comes from a nonprofit agency that kind of hosts this called the International Code Council. They are actually a North America, US focused organization. So the international is a little misleading in the sense that this is not pulling from international best practices across the world. It is a US based national kind of code set that is used in some other international contexts, like some Caribbean islands use the International Building Code or things of that nature as well. So I think I covered the important definitions.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for those definitions. But yeah, let's talk more about the middle housing specifically. So some of y'all watching this video might remember the massive middle housing campaign that we did in 2023. It was a really big deal. We had a huge push, signing in pro, sending emails, lobbying, writing letters to the editor, doing everything. And we were successful and passed the middle housing bill, HB 1110, that allowed all of the home types that Marcus was just talking about in all neighborhoods. However, here we are 3 years later, there's still some barriers to actually building this middle housing. But Marcus, can you tell us about some of those barriers?
Yeah, so just jumping off of one of the last definitions I talked about, currently how things work, there is a separation between our residential codes and our commercial codes. So even though HB 1110 required cities across the state to allow more middle housing and allow a triplex, which is just 3 units within a building, or sixplex, which is just 6 units within the building. A lot of cities are now required to allow these in their zoning codes, but their building code creates a separation where the multiplexes, triplex to sixplex, are treated as if they are similar to a 50 unit to 100 unit building. So they kind of have to follow the same standards and regulations on the building code side. And that's an expensive process, right? And so that adds a lot of costs, and there's a lot of difficulties even in the kind of small day-to-day things in which there's like more residential code inspectors than there is commercial code inspectors. So like, you know, making an appointment for your inspector to come in can be longer if you're in the commercial code than it is in the residential code. Even simple things like that. And so uh, in 2024, there was legislation that was passed in state law to kind of move the 3 to 6 unit multiplex into the residential code to try and make it align with the updates that happen with the zoning code and make it just less costly and more accessible for residential code builders and people that generally build townhomes or build duplexes to have the aspect to kind of be able to jump to that next level and build a triplex or a fourplex or a sixplex. And that's important because without that change, making your building just one more unit has such a big cost jump that without this change, a lot of the middle housing stuff would have still seen a lot of townhomes and duplexes as kind of the main housing outcome for a lot of development without these changes. So that's kind of like one of the biggest barriers, or that's the barrier from like the building code side of things is treating these multiplex middle housing buildings similarly to a townhome or a duplex or even a single family house. In some ways will kind of removing that barrier is important.
Awesome. Well, you defined stacked flats earlier, but I'd love it if we could talk more about these in particular. We've been highlighting them a lot in our campaign. This is probably not the first time folks have been hearing about stacked flats, but can you just tell us more about like what exactly they are and like why they are so important and why we're emphasizing them?
Yeah, so I think they're important because, I mean, just from a basic thing, or one point that I think is fun and interesting is that we just don't see a lot of stacked flats. We don't see a lot of multiplexes in Washington. And so it's kind of just an avenue for bringing a new housing type. And the reason why stacked flats in particular, I think are super exciting is they just hit a lot of the items and concerns and cares of policymakers and for potential residents and the kind of the general public, right? And so I think starting with that, there's just a larger opportunity for bigger units, and these bigger units can then be, more family-sized units where families and young couples can kind of have their first kid or have their first couple of kids, or even go through life in kind of a denser, more urban framework in living with these housing types, right? And so, sorry, I don't know if we can go back to that slide real quick. Yeah. And so just to kind of emphasize this aspect, and I also think another thing I wanted to highlight here is that it's also an opportunity for, people that are older and that are looking to downsize and maybe don't want to deal with stairs in their multi-story building anymore, in their multi-story house anymore, or they want to kind of get closer to the city center because they don't want to drive anymore and it's unsafe for them to drive, but they don't want to feel isolated. I think this is kind of an avenue for, larger units that are bigger than typical multifamily that we see, but are large enough for, downsizing, but still having an extra room so that I can have visitors, or bigger than the multifamily building that I generally live in, and so that I can actually start a family in type of thing, right? And so having that flexibility. And over here on the table, I just have kind of some examples from cities that allow sixplexes by right, and if using their standards, kind of getting a general sense of kind of the square footage. So you really are seeing opportunities or the potential opportunity to see units that are over 1,000 square feet, clearly over 1,000 square feet, and much larger than in some cases. In the case of Redmond, I'm not sure you'll ever see almost 2,000 square foot sixplex, but that'd be great. It'd be cool. Awesome if it actually happened. somebody should do it in Redmond. Another benefit is, which is the next slide, which is just the trees. And I know this has been a contentious topic, or just a topic of like people really care about having that green space and the tree canopy and kind of the urban fabric that allows for that. And a sixplex and these multiplexes put all the units in a compact building, which allows you to have that density without distributing them throughout the lot. And so you have more space in the backyard, for example, to have big trees, mature trees, versus some of the kind of typical layouts that we might see in Seattle or in some other parts of the state. Is you kind of have areas with multiple buildings on the lot, and these multiple buildings kind of split up where you can do open space. And so it just shrinks the kind of available open space that's available for trees and other uses. And then I think the third one I wanted to highlight is accessibility. And I think just generally the sixplexes or multiplex in general, whether it's 3 units, 4 units, 5 or 6 units, they do provide the opportunity to allow more ground floor accessible units. And I haven't actually like studied this, but I think possibly, arguably, you just also use less stairs in general to navigate your own home. So if you lived in a multi-story home, to navigate all aspects of your home, you have to go up and down the stairs. Whereas these units, everything within the home is on one floor, right? And so even if you're living on the second floor or the third floor, using the stairs once to get up to that floor to your home, and then once you're in your home, you can navigate your entire home without using stairs. But I think even without that, just at the base level, in kind of comparison to some other middle housing types, these create opportunities for ground floor accessible units, and people can then kind of not have to choose or make hard decisions about staying in their kind of bigger multi-story house, because the only thing that's available is a townhouse that is 3 stories and maybe is inaccessible to them. Nothing against townhomes, just want other opportunities as well.
Totally. So I'm sold. We should build more stack flats. You've convinced me. But yeah, I'd love to talk more now about like what does that advocacy actually look like? Because this year is a little bit different. Of like, we are focused on a legislative session and passing bills, but we've also got an eye towards the Building Code Council and advocacy with that. So could you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like this year?
Yeah, so a lot of things going on in the building code advocacy level of things, right? And so I think I'll start with in 2023, there was a state bill that was passed, a state law passed for increasing the height of a single stair allowance from generally, buildings that were served, residential buildings, smaller residential buildings served by a single stair by up to 3 stories, to increase that up to 6 stories statewide, and kind of follow what is allowed in Seattle currently and allow that in cities across the state. And so that was one thing that was passed in 2023, and the Building Code Council then needed to kind of take those things, work on it in what's called a technical advisory group, and kind of make recommendations for the Building Code Council to then vote and make those available. We are finally getting to the tail end of that process, where people in the technical advisory group, volunteers. I've been volunteering my time basically from April of 2025 to now, kind of participating in these technical advisory group meetings to ensure that the spirit of the law kind of came to fruition in the building code language itself. And so those are being finalized and will be, hopefully available. They are up online in some kind of draft versions, but like a more formal version should be available for people to view coming up in February. If as long as everything stays on track on their side. And yeah, so that's exciting from one state perspective, and there will be a public hearing or a public comment period, I should say. Not public hearing, but a public comment period that's upcoming and available as part of the Building Code Council. So that's an opportunity for people to plug in to kind of see where things are. And I think we'll discuss that a little bit later as well. I already mentioned the movement of the multiplex into the International Residential Code, or making that available in the International Residential Code. That has also been part of this technical advisory group's work as well, since that was a bill passed in 2024. So again, we have some bills that were passed, 2, 3, coming up on, 2 or 3 years now. And their implementation and the kind of the work that we're hoping to get out of it is going to finally be available for cities and builders coming up at the end of this year, at the latest early 2027. I know that can be that frustrating thing. The implementation can take a long time, but that's just currently how the process works right now. Some other things I think should be on the lookout for is there's a scissor stair bill both in the House and in the Senate. I think they're House Bill 2228 and then Senate Bill 6001, I believe are the right numbers there. And scissor stair bill, and scissor stairs are essentially trying to allow another kind of efficient stair configuration that takes some of the elements of a single stair, in which you kind of have one entry point, or you have one stair, and it allows for like bigger units and units that have, sun and light and air on multiple sides of the units, and kind of some of the benefits that you get from that, and bring them into the scissor stair conversation, which is actually allowing 2 stairs in kind of an efficient, enclosed, fire protected, safe manner. And it allows basically a lot of those benefits to occur for taller buildings. So if anybody's ever been to Vancouver, British Columbia, and you've walked around and seen the kind of the skinny high-rise towers, those are built using scissor stairs. And they would be much thicker buildings, more costly buildings, and probably less of them would exist if they had to build under the same regulations that we currently have to build in the state of Washington. And so that's why that aspect is important as well. And then the last one I want to touch base on is there is a bill that would allow smaller elevators. And this is another kind of accessibility thing. So I guess some background on the reason for why we need smaller elevators. The United States overall it builds the lowest per capita of elevators of any kind of peer nation. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but we're below Canada, we're below Japan, we're below Spain, we're below France, we're below anybody you can kind of think of. And these have consequences for accessibility, right? So we talked about earlier how a lot of these buildings currently under their structure are just walk-up buildings, right? And so maybe it's just the ground floor that's accessible, but you can't fit an elevator in these buildings because they are too big. And because they're too big, they're too expensive for projects of these sizes, which is why you have a lot of buildings end up being walk-up buildings, not being as accessible as. And so the smaller elevator bill would kind of allow the Building Code Council to come up with some new regulations and allowances that would allow smaller elevators for buildings of a certain size, which would then in this scenario, we could have sixplexes that actually have elevators. And then all of the units are accessible, right? And so we can both increase density and increase accessibility of our housing as we move forward, and not have to kind of pit between the two or do this type of thing. So that's why this is another thing that I'm super excited about that I hope gets passed during this session. Is something that the state can start working on and make it viable for these kind of smaller elevators that are still accessible, that are still, you know, people in wheelchairs can get into them. People with strollers can get into them anytime. If you have an injury and you kind of need, you know, there's just so many benefits to increasing and having elevators in buildings. And it's kind of been this thing that even for me, it's a new thing for me in the last couple of years. And it's just kind of this important thing, a component of housing and kind of accessibility and just higher quality of life, right? We want to make things convenient for people. We want urban life to feel nice and not be a struggle. And so these are things that, you know, a lot of cities and a lot of places are already doing, and we'd like to see in the state of Washington.
Yeah, sweet. Okay. So just to recap then, middle housing, a lot of awesome housing types, especially things like stack flats. We legalized these several years ago, but there's just like a ton of barriers to getting them actually built. And there's a wide variety of things that we're working on now, all the way from like stair configurations to elevators to building code policies, like a lot of really important things that we are working on to make sure that we are unlocking all of these housing types. So I think for folks that are listening along, probably at least somewhat familiar with the legislative session, and like it's pretty clear, like the action that we do, signing in pro, sending emails, making phone calls, like that timeline. I feel like we've gotten some practice going through. But can you talk through the like building code council process? Like you mentioned like a public comment period, but like what's next?
Yeah. So you mentioned those two things that are kind of going to be coming up on the building code council. So if things go, and I will be working with Marcella and FutureWise to make sure that we have, you know, a good alert system to when these things are happening for people. But if everything's on schedule, there's going to be a public comment period between maybe mid-February to end of March, maybe early April. I think they try to do, it's either 6 weeks or 2 months. I don't have the exact number how long the public comment period is, but it's a fairly good amount of time. For public comment, you'll have an opportunity to kind of review all things from the building code that they're, you know, potentially going to be updated, but specifically for us and how these things is the multiplex into the IRC, or the multiplex into the residential code, and the single stair building allowance. And that will happen. There will be a public comment period. And then after the public comment period, they will do some next steps in the building code council, where the building code council will make votes and maybe can allow for some edits after the comment period from kind of the recommendations before they do a final vote. And then they'll do a final vote, and at least on their website, their schedule says that they hope to have everything settled, voted on, and up for inclusion into the state residential code or the state building code by November of this year. So it'll be an end of the year process, and end of the year kind of thing, but that's kind of the timeline of how things are currently set up. And then if you're looking forward, if you want to think about how this works, again, the two other bills that we mentioned, the scissor stair bill and the elevator bill, will basically go through a similar process, where if they pass this year, the next code update cycle is when that work will happen for that. And that'll be a much longer process. And so something that maybe happens a couple of years down the line, just like these took a couple of years to get through their work groups. But that's typically how the Building Code Council does an update cycle every 3 years. It's like a 3 year update cycle. So I think that provides enough context. But in the intermediary, like things that are presently coming up is there's going to be a public comment period, February, March, maybe early April is kind of what people should be expecting.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for walking through the timeline and all of these wonky policies and like taking us on this middle housing journey. Really appreciate you being here, Marcus, and for all of your expertise on these issues. I know I've learned so much just talking with you about all these issues.
It's been fantastic. Thanks, Marcel, for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Well, for folks that are paying attention, are tuned in, we are going to be posting a link on our Facebook to sign up for updates. This, like Marcus was saying, like we've got public comment periods coming up for the Building Code Council, but also the legislative session is well underway. So if you click that link, sign up for updates. Every Sunday morning, we send out an email giving updates on all of our policy priorities and also walking through the easiest actions for you to take. So if you are excited about stacked flats and building more middle housing, make sure you click that link and sign up, and we will let you know when the public comment period is opening and help you get ready to take action. But that's all we got, folks. Yeah, thank you again, Marcus. This was fantastic, and I'll talk to everyone soon.